Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are stripping away the comfort of the modern world. I want you to mentally pack a bag, a very heavy insulated bag, because we are heading north. And I don't mean a weekend ski trip north where there is a lodge and hot cocoa waiting for you. I mean the kind of north where the compass starts acting funny and the horizon literally disappears into a white void. We are traveling to the Kivalic region of Nunavut, back when it was still the jagged, untamed edge of the Northwest Territories. We are going to the shores of Lake Anjikuni.
It's a landscape that it really defies standard description. When you look at the sources we've pulled for this, the RCMP files, the old yellowed newspapers, the anthropological studies, the one thing that screams out is the sheer overwhelming scale of the landscape. This is the barren ground.
The barren grounds, it sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, doesn't it? Like Mordor, but frozen. But it's a very real, very formidable place.
It is, absolutely. And to understand the story we're covering today, the mystery of the Village of the Dead, you have to understand the stage it's played on. It's rock, tundra, and water. For 8, maybe 9 months of the year, it is locked in ice. The silence, there isn't like silence in a library or a quiet room. It's a physical weight. It presses on you.
That's the atmosphere I want to sit in for a moment. It's November 1930. The Great Depression is just starting to grind the rest of the world down. Banks are failing. Lines are forming for soup kitchens. But up here, the economy is irrelevant. The currency is calories. It's heat. The temperature is dropping to 40 below zero. The wind is howling across hundreds of miles of flat ice with absolutely nothing to stop it until it hits you.
In that environment, isolation is the default state. It's the baseline of existence.
Yeah.
So shelter and community aren't just psychological comforts. They are biological necessities. You cannot survive alone there for long. The margin for error is zero.
Which brings us to the hook, the anomaly. This is the story of Joe Lebel.
Joe Lebel, the man at the center of the storm.
He's a fur trapper. He's out there in the soup, exhausted, freezing, likely frostbitten, and he heads toward a specific spot on the map, a known Inuit settlement on Lake Anjikuni. Now, tell me about the expectation versus the reality here, because he's not just looking for a windbreak, right? He's looking for people.
No, he's looking for life. He needs that human contact. Lebel claims he knew this village well. He describes it as a bustling community of the Caribou Inuit, specifically the Ahirmiid people. He's expecting to hear the chaos of life. Sled dogs barking, which is a deafening sound when you have a pack children playing, the crack of wood chopping, the smell of blubber smoke or burning willow. He's expecting to see about 25 to 30 people, maybe more.
A sanctuary.
Exactly. A pinprick of warmth in the void. But instead, he walks into nothing.
And this is the part that always gets me. It wasn't a crime scene in the traditional sense. It wasn't a battlefield.
No, there were no bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle, no spent shell casings, no signs that the camp had been packed up and moved in an orderly fashion. It was just empty.
It's the Marie Celeste on ice. It's that specific, creeping horror of interruption.
That's the key word, interruption.
I want you, the listener, to visualize this. It's not finding a ruin. It's walking into your friend's house for a dinner party. You walk in, the lights are on, the TV is playing the news. There's a pot of pasta boiling on the stove, steam rising, the bubbles popping, but the house is dead silent. There is no one there.
That is the visceral fear this story taps into. It's not the fear of what you see, it's the horror of what you don't see. It's the fear of immediate, unexplained erasure. It challenges our object permanence. We expect people to be where they're supposed to be. When they aren't, and there's no reason why, the brain, it just panics.
So here is our mission for this deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources here. We've got the sensational Danville Bee newspaper article from 1930 that started it all, a real piece of dramatic writing. We have the dry, typewriter-written reports from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We have modern skeletal analysis, anthropological records of the Inuit, and even some UFO literature that latched onto this story in the 80s.
It's quite a mix. It covers a full spectrum, from hard science to high strangeness. It really does.
We are going to sift through all of it. We're going to separate the documented facts from the snowballing legend.
And I think it's important to say, we aren't just trying to ruin a good ghost story.
No, though we might do a bit of that.
We want to look at this as a case study. It's a fascinating look at how the telephone game worked in 1930s media. It's about the clash between Western reporting and indigenous reality. And honestly, the real story, the history of the people who actually lived there, is in many ways more tragic and more compelling than the ghost story.
So let's start at ground zero, the sudden silence. Let's walk a mile in Joe Lebel's snowshoes. Who is this guy?
In the legend, And we have to keep distinguishing throughout this hour between the legend and the record. Joe Lebel is painted as the ultimate outdoorsman, a seasoned trapper, a man who knows the land like the back of his hand.
The old salt of the tundra, the guy who wrestles bears.
Right, he's not a tourist. The narrative relies on his authority. If a city slicker from Toronto says it was too quiet, you ignore them. They don't know what quiet is. If Joe Lebel says the silence was wrong, you listen.
So he's trekking through the snow, he sees the village in the distance, and this is where the sensory details in the reports get interesting. He doesn't hear the dogs.
And that is the first red flag. We cannot overstate the role of the Canadian Inuit dog. In 1930, a village of that size would have dozens of dogs. They are the alarm system, they are the engine, they are loud, they are territorial. If you approach a village and the dogs aren't challenging you, barking at you, or howling, something is fundamentally broken in the ecosystem of that camp.
He gets closer. He starts shouting greetings. Hello, is anyone home? Nothing, just the wind.
And the crunch of his boots on the hard-packed snow, that sound is incredibly loud when it's the only thing you can hear. He walks into the center of the camp, and this is where the visual cues start to contradict the auditory silence. He sees smoke, or at least evidence of recent fires.
He starts checking the tents. These are skin tents, right?
Yes, tupik, or in winter, potentially igloo or sawn houses. But the reports describe tents, which is an interesting detail we'll get to later. He lifts the flap of a dwelling, and what he finds is the anchor of the mystery. He finds food.
The famous pot of stew.
The sources vary wildly here, which is our first clue. Some say the stew was smoldering, some say it was warm, others say it was blackened and moldy. But the core narrative beat is that cooking was in progress.
Let's stop there, because that detail does a lot of heavy lifting. If I put a pot of caribou stew on the fire, that's an investment of time and resources.
Huge. You don't waste food in the Arctic. Calories are life. To leave a pot of stew boiling suggests that whatever happened in seconds. You don't say, hey, we need to migrate to the next hunting ground, leave the dinner. You eat the dinner, then you go. Or you take the pot.
It implies panic or abduction.
It implies a snap of the fingers, one moment here, the next gone. It creates a vacuum in the timeline that the listener has to fill with their imagination.
And it wasn't just the food. He found unfinished work.
This is the detail that feels the most intimate to me. He found shirts parkas lying there with bone needles still stuck in the hide.
That's a very specific, very human detail. Sewing was survival. Women spent hours every day chewing the hides to soften them, stitching them with sinew to make them waterproof and windproof. Leaving a needle in the hide is like pressing pause on a movie. It says, I am putting this down to check a noise outside, and I will be back in 30 seconds.
It rules out a planned departure. If you were fleeing, you'd drop the needle. If you're moving, you'd pack it.
Needles were valuable tools. You wouldn't leave them behind lightly. Making a bone needle takes time. You don't just toss it aside.
And then we get to the hardware, the rifles.
This is the detail that makes the planned migration theory fall apart in the legend's logic. Lebel reportedly found a rusty rifle, or in some accounts, a stack of rifles standing by the door.
Talk to me about the value of a rifle in 1930 Nunavut. It's life. By 1930, the Inuit had integrated firearms into their hunting. A .303 Lee Enfield, or a Winchester lever action. That is your primary tool for bringing down caribou. It's your protection against polar bears, barren ground grizzlies, and packs of wolves.
Leaving your rifle behind is...
It's suicide. Voluntary suicide. No experienced trapper, no Inuit hunter would voluntarily walk into the barren grounds unarmed if a weapon was available. It goes against every survival instinct instilled in them from birth.
So the logic trap the story sets for us is this. If they left willingly, they would have taken the guns. Since the guns are there, they didn't leave willingly. But there's no sign of a struggle, so where do they go?
Exactly. It corners you into a supernatural explanation by systematically removing the survival explanations. It says, you cannot explain this with logic.
And if that wasn't spooky enough, we have to talk about the dogs. This is the part that turns the stomach.
It is the darkest part of the narrative. Lebel reportedly found the fled dogs. 7 of them, though numbers vary tied to their posts. And they were dead.
Starved to death.
Yes. Buried under hard-packed snowdrifts.
Okay, I have a problem with the timeline here, and I'm not even an expert.
Go on.
We just said the stew was warm, or smoldering. That means the people left, what, hours ago? Maybe a day at most.
Correct. That is the implication of the warm food.
But dogs don't starve to death in a day. They don't starve to death in a week.
They do not. A hardy Arctic dog can survive for weeks without food, unfortunately. They're incredibly resilient animals. So we have a massive glitch in the matrix here. If the dogs starved to death, the village has been abandoned for weeks, maybe a month. If the stew is warm, it's been abandoned for hours.
Both cannot be true.
Not in the linear reality.
Right.
This is the first crack where the legend starts to look less like a police report and more like a ghost story written by someone who didn't check their continuity.
But emotionally, wow, it works because it adds cruelty.
It does. And it adds a layer of wrongness to the Inuit behavior. As we mentioned, the dog-human relationship is symbiotic. The dogs are the engine. If a tribe was starving and had to move on foot and couldn't take the dogs because the snow was too soft or the terrain too rough,
What would they do?
in a worst-case scenario, they would consume the dogs. It's grim, but it's survival. Or they would cut them loose to fend for themselves. Leaving them tied up to die is an act of waste and cruelty that doesn't fit the profile of a people surviving in the harshest environment on Earth. It paints the disappearance as something maligned, something evil.
So Lebel is standing there, the wind is howling, he's got dead dogs on one side, warm stew on the other. He's terrified. He goes to the edge of the village, to the burial ground. And this is where the story goes from missing persons to temple.
Yeah. He claims he found a grave that had been opened.
Empty.
And the detail here is forensic. He claims the cairn stones, the heavy rocks piled on top to protect the body, were not scattered. They were stacked neatly in two piles.
Which rules out animals. A bear is a chaotic digger. A bear doesn't stack rocks.
Exactly. This implies intelligence. And it implies a total violation of the natural order. In Inuit culture, the dead are respected. The burial cairns are sacred. For a grave to be opened and the body removed, it suggests that whatever took the living didn't stop there. It came for the ancestors too.
It's a total erasure of the community, past, present, and future.
That's a terrifying concept. It says the death is not even a sanctuary.
So Lebel books it. He runs or snowshoes miles to the nearest telegraph office. He gets the message out. And this brings us to the fork in the road, because now the authorities get involved.
Right. We have the legends version of the investigation and the historical version, and they are very different.
Let's indulge the legend first. In the story told around campfires, what happens?
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Mounties arrive. They confirm everything. They see the stew, the needles, the dead dogs, the empty grave. And then they add a new layer. High strangeness.
The blue lights.
Yes. This comes from the testimony of a trapper named Armand Laurent and his sons. They told the RCMP that days earlier, they had seen a bizarre gleaming object in the sky.
Not the northern lights.
No, they were specific. It described a shapeshifter, a cylinder that turned into a bullet shape, flying toward Anjikuni. And the RCMP officers themselves, in the legend, reported seeing pulsing blue lights that they confirmed were artificial.
That is a bold claim. These are men who live under the aurora borealis. They know what the sky looks like. They know the difference.
Exactly. So the legend wraps this up in a nice bow. A village vanishes, physical evidence proves it was sudden, and credible witnesses saw UFOs heading that way. Case closed, aliens did it.
But we are the deep dive. We don't stop at the campfire story. We have to open the filing cabinet.
And when you open the filing cabinet on Lake Anjikuni, the cold, hard light of day floods in.
Enter Sergeant J. Nelson.
Sergeant Nelson, the buzzkill of the Arctic. He filed an official report in January 1931.
He was tasked with investigating Kelleher's story, right? The newspaper story.
He was. And his report is blistering. He basically says, I have investigated this, and there is absolutely no foundation for this story.
No foundation. That's strong language. That's not just we couldn't find evidence.
No, it's a complete refutation. He starts by attacking the witness, Joe Lebel. The legend says Lebel was an old friend of the village, a veteran. Nelson pulled the records. Joe Lebel had taken out his first trapping license that very season.
He was a rookie, a greenhorn.
It appears so. He wasn't a grizzled veteran of Anjikuni. He was a newcomer to the territory.
That changes the perspective entirely. If I walk into a strange neighborhood, I might misinterpret what I'm seeing. If I've lived there for 20 years, I know when something is wrong.
Precisely. Nelson implies Lebel didn't know what he was looking at, or, more likely, that Lebel was a convenient mouthpiece for a journalist.
Let's talk about that journalist, Emmett Kelleher.
Kelleher was writing for the Danville Bee and other papers.
Yeah.
He was a color writer. In the 1930s, you have to remember, yellow journalism was alive and well. The goal was to sell papers.
And what sells papers better than a ghost story during the Depression? A little escapism, even if it's terrifying.
Nilsson found that the photo Kelleher used, the haunting image of the empty camp, was actually a generic archive photo from 1909.
Fake news, 1930s style.
But the biggest point the RCMP made was about the logistics, the demographics. They stated that a village of that size, 25 to 30 people, was a significant settlement in that region.
It's not Manhattan, but in the Bering Grounds, that's a metropolis.
Exactly. And in that network, the Hudson's Bay Company traders, the missionaries, the police patrols, everyone knew where the major camps were. A permanent village of that size doesn't just pop up and vanish without a paper trail. The traders would know them by name. They would have credit at the store.
And Nelson checked the books.
He checked the books. There was no record of a settlement of that size at that specific location on Lake Anjikuni at that time.
So the RCP stance is, this isn't a mystery, it's a hoax.
It's an urban legend. It started with Kelleher's story, got amplified by Frank Edwards in his 1959 book, Stranger Than Science, and just took on a life of its own.
Okay, so we have a hoax hypothesis. But I want to play detective. Let's look at the details in the story, the facts Lebel reported, and see if they hold up to scrutiny. Because there are some things that just don't fit the physics of the North.
The most glaring one is the kayaks.
Right. Lebel said he saw kayaks battered by wave action on the beach.
Host, it is November in Nunavut.
The water is hard.
The water is stone. Lake Anjikuni is frozen solid. There are no waves. There is no lapping at the shore. It would be a sheet of ice, several feet thick.
That sounds like a detail written by someone sitting in a warm office in Winnipeg or Toronto who forgot to check the weather report.
Exactly. It's a literary flourish that betrays a total lack of local knowledge. And then there's the clothing. The sources mention sealskin parkas left behind.
Now, to the average listener, Eskimo equals sealskin. That's the stereotype.
Right, that's the stereotype. But anthropologically, it's a dead giveaway. The Inuit at Anjikuni were the Iarmiut, the people of the deer. They were inland Inuit. They lived hundreds of miles from the ocean.
They didn't hunt seals.
They hunted caribou. Their tents were caribou skin, their kayaks were caribou skin, their parkas were caribou skin.
So finding a village full of sealskin parkas at Anjikuni.
It's like finding a village full of surfboards in the Sahara. Could one person have traded for a sealskin coat? Sure, maybe. But for the narrative to characterize the village by sealskin clothing proves the storyteller didn't know the difference between coastal Inuit and inland Inuit.
It's a cultural copy-paste error.
It is, and it strongly suggests the story was fabricated by an outsider.
And then there's the inflation, the numbers game. This is fascinating to watch over the decades.
Oh, it's a classic fish story.
Yeah.
In the 1930 article, it's 25 people. Manageable.
A few families, a small community.
By 1959, Frank Edwards bumps it to 30. Still plausible. But then the UFO books get a hold of it in the 70s and 80s. Suddenly, it's not a camp, it's a town. The number jumps to 1,200. I've even seen 2,000.
2,000 people in the barren grounds. That's impossible.
It is ecologically impossible. The land cannot support that density of hunter-gatherers in one spot. You would strip the land of game in a week.
And we have the census, right? The boring, bureaucratic shield against nonsense.
The 1931 Census of Canada. It tracks populations. In a region that's sparsely populated, a loss of 25 people is a statistical event. A loss of 2,000 is a national catastrophe. It would be front-page news in Ottawa, not a back-page curiosity in the Danville Bee.
And a census showed.
Normal demographic fluctuations.
Yeah.
No missing lost tribe of Anjikuni.
Okay, so the sensational version is full of holes. The kayaks are wrong, the clothes are wrong, the numbers are wild. But
Yeah.
I want to push back a little. Let's assume Lebel was a rookie, yes. But maybe he did see something. Maybe he didn't see a ghost town with room stew, but he saw an empty camp. What could actually make a community leave so abruptly that a rookie would think they vanished?
This is where we pivot to reality. The first and most likely explanation is simply seasonal migration.
They were nomads.
Strictly so. The Iarmiut followed the caribou herds. They didn't have addresses, they had camps. When the herd moved, they moved.
So Lebel might have just stumbled upon a camp that had been packed up for the season, an empty seasonal camp.
It's very possible. He finds a camp that is currently empty. But, you ask, what about the rifles and the food?
Yeah, why leave this stuff, the valuable stuff?
Two possibilities. One, Lebel exaggerated. He saw some trash, maybe broken rifle, discarded food scraps, and the warm stew was an invention of the journalist. That's the most parsimonious explanation.
But the fish was this big explanation.
Right. But possibility two is darker. Disease.
The sickness of the lungs.
The 1920s and 30s were a horrific time for indigenous populations in the North regarding pathology. Tuberculosis and influenza were tearing through these communities. They had little immunity.
So if a camp gets hit by a virulent flu,
Panic can set in. Or sheer necessity. If people start dying, the survivors might flee. They might try to make it to a trading post for medicine. They might be too weak to pack the sleds properly. They might just take what they can carry and go.
so they just walk away, leaving things behind.
They limp away. They might leave the dead unburied because they physically cannot dig the cairns or lift the
From
stones.
the open grave Lebel found, the neatly stacked stones.
Frost heave.
Explain that.
The ground in the Arctic is active. It's permafrost. It freezes, thaws in the top layer, expands, contracts. It pushes things up. It moves. It can easily topple a pile of stones over time. To a rookie trapper who doesn't know what to look for, a toppled cairn looks like desecration. To a geologist or someone familiar with the land, it just looks like winter.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So you have a rookie trapper, unnaturally abandoned or perhaps disease-struck camp, and a storyteller journalist looking for a scoop.
It's the perfect recipe for a legend. You take a mundane tragedy, add some spooky details, and ignore the cultural context, and it just grows.
But here's where I want to pause, because even if we debunk the aliens and the ghosts and the UFOs, there is a reason this story sticks. Why are we still talking about it in 2026? It's not just a good yarn.
It's the enduring unease.
It's not just about the facts. It's about the feeling, the chill it gives you.
It touches on that primal fear we mentioned at the start, the fear of the void. We all want to believe that our lives have weight, that we are anchored here. The idea that we can simply cease to be, that our unfinished shirts and our warm dinners will outlast us, is terrifying.
It makes us feel fragile.
It makes us feel like we are just temporary guests on the land. And in the North, that is literally true. The land is indifferent to you. It will swallow you without malice.
And interestingly, Anjikuni itself seems to be a magnet for this kind of high strangeness. Farley Mowat was there, right?
The famous naturalist and writer, yes. He was there in 1948, almost 20 years later, and he found a cairn at Anjikuni.
Did he find a body?
No, he found a hardwood box with dovetailed corners.
Dovetailed corners, that's not Inuit construction, that's sophisticated woodworking.
No, that is European joinery, high-quality stuff. Mowat speculated it might be a relic from the Franklin expedition, the famous lost British expedition from the 1840s.
So Anjikuni might be a crossroads, a place where lost people have been passing through and dying for a long time.
It suggests the location holds memory. Even if the Joe Lebel story is 90% fiction, the setting is a place of history and tragedy. It feels haunted because, in a way, it is.
And we can't talk about this without mentioning the indigenous perspective beyond just debunking the sealskin parkas. We talked about the blue lights and the supernatural element.
There is the figure of Torngarsuk in Inuit mythology, a powerful sky spirit or protector spirit, sometimes benevolent, sometimes not.
The idea is that if you offend the land or the spirits, you are removed.
It aligns with the deep respect for nature required to survive there. In folklore, disappearance is often the penalty for disrespect, for breaking a taboo. It serves as a warning to the living. Do not take this place for granted. Don't upset the balance.
So the story functions on multiple levels. It's a horror story for the West, a warning for the local culture, and a mystery for the historians.
It's a prism. Depending on how you look at it, you see different things. Science, folklore, history.
But before we wrap up, I think we need to ground this in the most important reality, the human reality. Because while we are analyzing ghost villages, real people actually did disappear from this region, but not by aliens.
This is the tragedy that often gets overshadowed. The Aharamiet, the very people Lebel supposedly was looking for, faced a brutal reality in the 20th century.
This wasn't just mystery, this was policy.
In the 1950s, the Canadian government decided that the Aharamiet could not survive on the land anymore. The caribou migration patterns had changed, partly due to overhunting and climate shifts. Famine was real.
So they helped them.
They forced them to relocate. They moved them to settlements like Arviat and Rankin Inlet, put them in houses.
They took them off the land.
Yes. And the transition was devastating. They were hunters moved to coastal towns where their skills were useless. Disease was rampant. The social fabric fell apart. Many of them died, not mysteriously, but from neglect and malnutrition and heartbreak in the care of the state.
That's a sobering thought. The real disappearance of the Anjikuni people was bureaucratic. It was slow and painful and documented.
Exactly. We obsess over the spooky story of 1930 because it's exciting. It's a puzzle. But the slow, painful erasure of a culture in the 1950s is the real horror story.
We look for ghosts, and we miss the people standing right in front of us.
That is often the case with these legends. They distract us from the harder, more complicated truths. Well, we have certainly sifted through the stack today. We've looked at the frozen stew, the starving dogs, the blue lights, and the census data.
And we found that while the facts point to a hoax or a misunderstanding, the emotional truth of the story, that fear of the void, is what keeps it alive.
I want to leave you, our listener, with this thought. We've spent an hour debunking the warm stew and the unfinished shirts. We know it's likely not true, but imagine for a second, just a second, if you walked into your own home today, right now, and you found dinner on the stove bubbling away, your family's phones are on the table, the TV is on, but the house is silent.
No note, no chaos, just absence. What is the first explanation your mind would jump to? And would you be brave enough to stay and investigate?
Or would you run into the cold like Joe Lebel?
That is the question.
It certainly is.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the silence of the North. Stay curious, stay warm, and we'll see you next time.